Hi, I'm Neil Aquino with Alexander Montalvo. This is Texas Grassroots Alliance live stream, and we're talking today about the impact and relationships between candidates, campaigns, and elected officials and how they interact with grassroots organizing. And we are both grassroots organizers. Alex, what do you got?
So this is a big topic for us to talk about because I think there's a lot of confusion for folks in terms of the roles people have within campaigns and candidates and what elected officials have. I think what's important for people to understand is that from a grassroots organizer's perspective, we are looking to have autonomy within our communities to build relationships, to navigate, to be able to respond to the needs of the community. We don't want to prescribe things for our community. We want to be able to be representative of them. Um, but that work may take us in a number of different spaces. It may take us into mutual aid work. It may take us into advocacy and activism. And then it may take us into electoral organizing, right? So sometimes we're working to elect someone to better represent the community based on what the community is needing because there's poor representation or there's insufficient needs being met based on the representation. But then when that person's in office, sometimes we need to do some advocacy or activism around that elected official to be able to make sure that policies are put in place. And sometimes we need to circumvent all of that and just work with community to actually serve people's needs. So I think for a lot of folks, it's understanding like what is a grassroots organizer first and why that autonomy is so important. Because sometimes we are going to collaborate with candidates and elected officials in campaigns, and sometimes we're going to be holding them accountable. And we need to be able to navigate whichever piece we need to do for the benefit of the community.
Mhm. Right. So there are activists who want autonomy. So autonomy means access to resources. Autonomy means intellectual freedom within a movement. Autonomy means the ability to represent or serve your conscience and represent and serve your community. And autonomy means the ability to use your talents as you have to better your community. So there's multiple definitions of autonomy, though they all come back to freedom. They are not inherently or reflexively anti-establishment. They're not inherently or reflexively anti-institutional or large nonprofit connected to elected official. They are not inherently in opposition to something, but it's about the right and the ability and the platforms that we'll have to create as grassroots organizers to use that autonomy and to have that autonomy.
Yeah, I think that's key is that who we are beholden to is the community first. We're not trying to be beholden to an individual leader, whether they're a candidate or an elected official. We're not trying to be beholden to a party. Although, in the values that we have and the work that we do, it's very clear that there's an opportunity to collaborate with one party versus another on a whole host of issues. Um, but who we're beholden to is the community first. And I think it's from that lens that tension can happen with candidates, campaigns, and elected officials because unfortunately they're not always beholden, even though they're supposed to represent the community, even though the community is their constituency and who they're trying to represent and serve. Um, Sometimes they're conflicted because they're either overly beholden to a party or they're overly beholden to a particular part of their constituency, the folks with money, who their donors are.
Mhm.
And whenever that creates a conflict on how they're serving and representing the community, then this is where grassroots organizers are going to step in to try to push on that conflict if it's negatively impacting the community. And I think a lot of folks struggle with this. You know, campaigns and elected officials and party folks struggle with grassroots organizers because, I thought we were friends. Why are you trying to hold me
Right.
accountable?
Right.
Or I'm the leader in the room. You need to know because I'm the smartest one in the room. And it's like, no, you're here to serve. You're a public servant,
Right.
and this is what the public is trying to tell you. And I think for grassroots organizers, sometimes because we enter these spaces, sometimes when it comes to electoral time like this year, 2024 being such a huge election, sometimes we can get stuck into the political electoral party mechanics, and we're trying to navigate, folks are trying to navigate that effectively, but kind of get swept in sometimes in those spaces, and they realize, okay, we're causing tension with the community because people are wondering, you know why are you holding the water for this person who is not doing right by the community. um, and so it's a space that is just like we talked about earlier. We need to have these tough conversations within our communities and with multiple communities. um, Working as a grassroots organizer with candidates, campaigns, and elected officials is very much a point of tension as well.
Right. And and what I've come to see, so I've I've involved myself in protests, and then also just in independent political action. And what you see is that autonomy autonomy is itself suspect. The act of autonomy is itself. So all collective action is political. And the more totalitarian or the more moving towards restriction a society is, the more suspicious autonomous action, whatever it is, becomes becomes suspect and becomes something that they want to have, the conspiratorial but that they want to have control of. And you see in authoritarian societies things like book clubs or sporting clubs become political. And then within our context, not authoritarian, but moving towards authoritarianism in some respects, you have the aggressive or enhanced policing of autonomous action. And so I could organize a demonstration against climate change, that really is moderate and reflects people's views, and I will get multiple police officers. My councilperson or congressperson could organize the same and would get a very different official response. So the autonomy itself, and then for our elected officials, who may share our aims, who may be good people, and it's really important for me not to define myself inherently reflexively against people we're talking about, but just to see the nuance. Um, One of the most difficult things, I think, for organizers or for volunteers, just for the good person who's out block walking, the dedicated volunteer who is in a sense an organizer, is that the people we're walking and participating for aren't advocates of higher turnout, because there might be a primary challenger in that activated public, or it might be more difficult to control a safe district or electorate. So autonomy can be about interactions with police. It can be a street protest, or it can be even just the most routine political action. But if elected officials or if institutions, we talk often on our shows here about nonprofits full of good people, but connected to institutional donors or connected to relationships with politicians, if they don't control those things, they're wary of it. And then also, if they don't control those things, and those things are done effectively, it refutes the model that I need a degree or a specialized degree or an advanced degree, or I need relationships with people in power to advocate effectively for my community.
Yeah, so I think this touches on something that a lot of grassroots organizers we hear from. I know you and me, Neil, have talked about, but also just within the body of grassroots organizers have talked about. What do we mean by community? I think is a fundamental question.
Right, sure is.
And I think for a lot of candidates, they are recruited from a managerial and executive class of the economy.
Mm-hmm.
And so their community is really each other. So you see a lot of folks focused on, what do the members of the Chamber of Commerce think of me? What do the members of the Rotary Club think of me? What are the members of certain influential groups within the community that are really an overlap of this managerial and executive class of folks within industry, within institutions, and things like that. What we're talking about community is where people are living, right? Where communities are actually residing and living within our cities and neighborhoods and things like that. And so there's already a tension being introduced, because when someone's trying to win an office, they may not actually go to the neighborhoods to talk to people. They
Right.
may not actually go to the physical communities that people live in,
Right.
but they're going to go to the communities of influence, because it's their blessing that they're wanting to be able to run, and it's that network that they're wanting to collaborate with. And that starts to create a tension between what policies are they prioritizing, um, and what kind of topics they're going to talk about. One of the things within the Texas Grassroots Alliance that we've already shared is the Texas Poor People's Campaign, because poverty is the fourth leading cause of death in America, and there's a number of factors that are impacting people's life expectancy and quality of life, that are wages, healthcare, education, and on and on and on.
Mm-hmm.
Yet during campaign season, you will hardly hear anyone talk about poverty.
Right.
Why? Because that's not the community they're trying to talk to.
So that okay. So that's just actually you're hitting something that I was been thinking about. Right. What communities are they trying to reach? Right. And so that's another reason to keep it at low turnout. That's a reason to cut off at the source grassroots involvement. And again, grassroots can be, we're not here to define grassroots. That could be the volunteer block walking who's activated to greater involvement later, not that their involvement isn't sufficient, or it's someone who does it all the time. Because who are the communities? So lower turnout keeps those communities narrow, and divided turnout, seeking to divide constituencies on any basis, ethnic, religious, demographic, class, gender, any inhibits. And I was just thinking, so what communities are you trying to reach? So there was just there's a person here, and this isn't a bad person. I know them a little bit, but there's a person here who lost a school board race in Houston. I'm in Houston. There's a person, but the Texas Grassroots Alliance serves all communities, big, small, rural, urban, suburban, across the state. And that's important in expanding, defining community as everyone, not just populous counties. And so this person lost a school board race 2 years ago, whatever, after a controversy about a mishandled superintendent of schools decision, lost the race. And then after this controversy, then ran for Houston City Council, had all this official backing, only won 10% of the vote in the first round. And yet this person was appointed yesterday, or confirmed, to be on our board of our metro, of our transportation entity. And I was just thinking to myself, how many, and they were just our establishment. And I look for words that are different, that don't reflexively convey, but how many times did this person have to fail up, and they still end up on a board membership of a big old transportation agency with millions of bucks? And I'm like, what? And so the same people, and if you're as a time waster as I am, lurking on Facebook, you'll lurk sometimes, and you'll see who's at the Sports Authority gala, who's at this gala, who's at this, and it's the same people invited by the same people. And
Right.
you could say, hey, whatever, what the hell. But when you see a person fail up to be a board member who couldn't, when on the ballot, succeed, could not elicit popular support, and yet they remain. So that question of communities we're speaking to is a big deal, and we need to expand. We need to define and expand those communities as widely as we can.
Yeah, and so this is where there is a completely missed opportunity to incorporate grassroots organizers into some institutional infrastructure
Right.
that I think is frustrating for a lot of community leaders within the work that they do. So when an elected official for like city council gets to then appoint people to committees to be able to serve around, the libraries or the parks or whatever it is, that a lot of times they are not going to grassroots organizers to be able to serve in those roles
Or even listening to them.
or to even listen to
Even
them.
just
So a
listen.
lot of times grassroots organizers will go to the public comments, right? Or they'll take an action to get heard, right?
Yes.
Because where they should be valued and where there is an opportunity is to, one, be appointed to those committees, and then for the elected officials to actually hear out those committees. But
Right.
in a lot of cities, these committees are non-functional. They don't show up for attendance. They're not actually participating, and it's more of a facade, unfortunately, for too many communities versus an actual function, an institutional infrastructure function to be connected to community voices and to the perspective of communities. The other example I want to give really quick is when elected officials have staff members. Who are they hiring for their staff? Their chief of staff, their deputy director, or whoever it is that is an asset to them in terms of being engaged to the physical communities that they represent, the physical neighborhoods and the physical perspectives of where these communities are, versus being a fellow member of the Chamber of Commerce or a fellow member of their alumni, to where they're once again creating their own echo chamber versus hearing the community. And this is where grassroots organizers are so important, because they're trying to break through those echo chambers.
Actually, I was a staffer for 3 years in my 20s for a city councilman. But so I've been in that position. But one of my pet peeves is you will get staffers who are with grassroots people or people they perceive outside their fold they're snarky, or you will see this all the time, and these are people you probably agree with 90%, but they are there to the snarky person whose snark or their power to be dismissive of a fellow active citizen, to make it a little more serious rather than a pet peeve. Their power to dismiss a good person is rooted in the institutional power that is suppressing turnout, that is recirculating elites. Who was the Italian Gramsci, who you use that term, and that kind, you will see that phenomena all the time of the younger, career-minded, although not exclusively younger, person who deflects and mutes and denigrates participation outside of official channels, with a power that is rooted in officialdom rather than in grassroots. And so what happens is not good public policy. What happens is that person then rises, and then someone comes, and it's the same cycle over and over and over.
Yeah. And I think to bring this point home for everyone is to look at the difference between the resources allocated to a campaign
Yes.
versus resources allocated to grassroots organizers. Once again, there's somebody who's running for office to officially represent the community, to officially serve the community. Yet too often we see that's not reality. They're not actually serving the community. They're serving their self-interest. They're serving the self-interest of their donors, and they're serving the self-interest of the, um, you know, more affluent class within their community and city, right? And so grassroots organizers are working on the ground floor, on the front lines, building relationships with people who are enduring various trauma because of cancer clusters, because of environmental issues of industrial zoning, or dealing with public education and the fact that, there's not adequate resources for the classrooms or for the campus versus on the other side of town there is. Dealing with healthcare inequities, wage inequities, not a livable wage, there's not housing. So we're working with community members who are trying to fight and solve all of this stuff. Yet, as a collective, our society is saying, I need to give money to the campaign and the candidate and the elected official, and not the grassroots organizer who's going to try to build the power to make sure that the needs of the vast majority in our community are met. And you ask yourself why? Because the way we process investment in campaigns and candidates for those of us that have resources to give to campaigns and candidates is because I'm making that money put into that place so I can get something out of it. Because as a donor, I see myself an elevated value potentially, depending on how much you donate, and having the ear of that person versus us giving resources to the grassroots community organizer who is working their ass off to try to serve the needs of the community in an unofficial capacity, but more in a just community-based capacity.
Right. So I'll wrap up to that point. There was just a great example of that in Houston where there was a vacant board seat in the last few weeks for the Port of Houston, which is a big, big, big deal. And it was announced only a few days in advance that the vacancy was coming. Mayor Whitmire appointed a donor, and the advocacy groups. The thing is, the advocacy groups came to council last moment, disrupting their day to spend 2 or 3 hours in the council chambers for 1 minute or 2 minutes, disrupting their day of advocacy. And these groups, these are good people. I want to be super clear. These are good, fine people, but these are groups that that mute some of their voices because they are connected to official channels. There's no judgment in that. But even people who already mute their voice came, and this deal was cooked. This deal was cooked. And the council members, they would speak, and the council members would say, "Oh, thank you, so and so, for your advocacy and in the poor." And these are where the cancer club, the environmental degradation proximate to the ship channel is off the charts. Predominantly, though not exclusively, Latino communities, but also white and black, and Asian, and they, oh, hey, you've done great. And then 20 minutes later, they took a vote, and it was 16-0. And these folks they would have been better off doing anything. They would have been better off doing anything rather than standing in that chamber for 1 minute. Mm-hmm. And they were in some respects semi-official voices, and that still wasn't enough. It still wasn't enough.
Yeah, because unfortunately right now money talks, right? And this is the environment we're in. And I think this is where the Texas Grassroots Alliance is trying to help not only grassroots organizers develop their efforts and their organization efforts and their collaborative efforts and their coalition efforts to capture resources to sustain their work, because they will be burnt out within 2 to 4 years if they aren't provided resources, or if they do pursue resources, it may take them out of their community because there aren't any for them to be able to serve their community where they're at. But this is why it's important in the Texas Grassroots Alliance, we talk about capturing resources to sustain us in this work, to build this network, and why we challenge our communities to not give every dollar they have to campaigns and candidates. They still need their money. We understand there's still expenses and a process that needs to be put into that. But all of that money is not adequately utilized. Money gets spent on PR efforts and a PR strategy versus actual organizing, which is relationship building. And this is what we need within our communities, is this relationship building. And so our opportunity to have this conversation is for people to really understand the distinction between what campaigns, candidates, and elected officials are operating and navigating through versus how grassroots organizers are navigating. And this immense amount of inequity when it comes to resources is really important for us to solve, because from our analysis right now, 10% of the market share you give to grassroots organizers, you fundamentally change the community, you fundamentally change the state, because that's how much money is being poured into campaigns and candidates, and how vast the inequity is that we just need 10% of that immense amount of money, and we make a huge difference.
So this is Texas Grassroots Alliance live stream, and this is our 7th show, and we are in it for the long haul. We're different formats, different lengths, different times, different topics. We're going to get to different hosts. We've had guests, and we asked you to contribute to the Texas Grassroots Alliance. Ask you to watch the show, share the show when you're on board. And in the future, please comment. And I'm Neil Aquino, and I also run the Houston Democracy Project at houstondemocracyproject.com, and I'm a co-organizer of the protest outside of John Cornyn's Houston office, where we set the physical example of showing up every Tuesday, 11:30 to 1 at 5300 Memorial Drive. We've been out there for 368 weeks, and we are setting the physical example. Nothing will deter us, weather, things thrown at us, anything, no matter the physical and political challenges ahead. And Alexander Montalvo of the Texas Grassroots Alliance has been our co-host, speaker, organizer, facilitator for this conversation.
Yeah. Well, I think this was a great conversation. I'm looking forward to us having more of these conversations, bringing in more organizers into these conversations, and the hearing and the comments from folks who are able to engage with us. Let us know what your thoughts in terms of the tensions and the impacts and the difference between the work of grassroots organizers and how that impact in relationships with candidates, campaigns, and elected officials ultimately makes an impact around your work and how you want to see it improved. But Neil, this has been a great conversation. I'm glad we got to connect.
Very good. Thank you. Thanks everyone for watching. See you next time.